Today I'll talk about CSS cascading style sheets. In a previous lecture, I talked about HTML hypertext transfer markup language that we use to create a document and structure it. Now it's time for us to make it pretty with cascading style sheets or CSS. So let's get started. I will, again, use the code that we built. It's in this repository on GitHub under src directory. So I have the code here with me. So there are two different ways you can go about developing this. The first one is you open your text editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code, and you go to your file explorer. You want to open the HTML pages, right click, open with a browser like Google Chrome, and that should open the page that we developed in your browser. So every time you change the code, you would go here and refresh to see the changes. That's one way. Now, a better way that we've been using as much as possible is with the live preview of Visual Studio Code. So here I have Visual Studio Code open. So I click File, Open Folder, and open that directory for my project. And you can see there's the src directory here with the files that we wrote yesterday, index and sign up. Now, what I do is I install an extension. If you go to this building blocks icon and click that, look for Microsoft Live Preview and install this Live Preview extension here. This is the one I recommend. So after installing that, all you have to do is open the file you want to preview, and you open the command palette in Visual Studio Code. It's View Command Palette or the hotkey Control-Shift-P in my case. I am using Windows right now, so I press Control-Shift-P, and you can see I can type Live Preview, and I can choose the one for Show Preview with Internal Browser. And I should see on the right-hand side this page being previewed. So I can click the link and it goes to the other form that we built for the sign up, and I can go back home. Okay, so let's work on the CSS today. So why CSS? Well, we want to make things look pretty, and we want to add some spacing between things, change the position, do that kind of stuff. Whereas the HTML, we just lay out the structure like this. We need the CSS. Now, there are different ways to go about defining style with CSS. The easiest way we can do right now is with a style tag. And typically we can put that if you go to the head. So this is the open tag for the head. This is the closing tag. So before the closing tag, I'm going to make a new line and add an open tag for style. And then I'm going to close the tag for style. And then in between, I like to add a new line and write the CSS there. So I'm going to start off like this, and then later I'll show you how we can move the CSS code to an external file, which is usually what everybody does. And that's done with the link tag. Anyway, so CSS, you got to first tell, okay, here's the document index.html. We need to know what you want to style. And the first thing you got to specify is what's called a selector. Okay, in this document, if I go through the document, what are the things I want to select for changing of the style? So for example, if I want to change all the paragraphs, for example, this Lauren Ibsen here is a paragraph, it's a P tag. I could say P like this, and that's the selector. That's the element name selector. That means all paragraph elements or P elements in this document will have the styles that I define between the open and closing curly brace. We usually like to break a line there, but of course you could type everything in a single line, but that's not pretty at all for us humans to read. So I usually like to have a line break there. And you notice Visual Studio Code always adds what's called indentation, that space to the left-hand side starting there. It's at least 2 for every single opening tag that you do or open braces. Anyway, let's change the color of this paragraph, of all the paragraphs to red. So how would you say that in CSS? Well, first you got to say, okay, what's the property you want to change, the style property? Well, I want to change the text color. The name of that property is just color. Now I have to specify what's the color, red, green, blue, and so on. To specify that, we got to separate the property name and the value with a colon, which is the two dots. And then you can give it a color. Look that Visual Studio Code is smart. It gives us suggestions for all the colors we can write here. So that's very nice. So you can type, for example, red. And then to finish off, you have to say semicolon, which is the dot with the comma. Okay, so CSS selector for all the P's, CSS property color with value red. For syntax, we separate the property name and value with a colon, and then at the end, always semicolon. Now you can see, if you can see the colors, that Lorem Ipsum and all the other paragraphs are now in red color. And we can go further if you want to change, for example, the background color of all those paragraphs. All you have to do is add more property, value pairs. You can do either before this or after. Okay, let me do before so you can see. So I can say the property name is background color. You can see as I start typing that Visual Studio Code will suggest certain properties. Background color, colon, to separate the value, and then let's say black, and then finish off with semicolon. Now, if you notice, all the paragraphs, the P elements, have now a background color black, as well as the color red. Like I said, this line here, line 7, you can place also afterwards, and it doesn't matter. It's the same outcome. Now, how did I move the line? If you're curious, I hold the Alt key and press the keyboard arrow up and down to move in VS Code, okay? Okay, now you might see people adding a space after the selector here, name here, like this. And you might see people adding space after the colon. And we usually do that because I think it's better on the eyes to visualize things. It's just a matter of coding style, but it doesn't affect the outcome. Just like I told you before, it could even have one single line here, and it'll be the same thing. By the way, I'm using view word wrap option. That's why you're seeing it wrapped, but it's actually just one line there. It doesn't matter. The outcome is the same, but it's really hard. It's harder for us to see as we're reading the code. So I think one property per line is the ideal for when we write CSS. And I'm gonna re-enable my view word wrap because I don't like scrolling horizontally. So that's just gonna wrap everything so I can see the whole line like that. Okay, so that's pretty much how CSS goes. You just got to figure out, okay, what do I want to target on the document to change the style? I got to figure out my selector. Once I figure that out, I can just specify all the properties that I need to change. Now, the properties is the challenge, right? What's the combination of properties that I have to use to achieve my design, right? So you can draw something and then you're going to go in CSS and figure out what's the properties that I have to use to achieve this drawing that I had. Okay. So you might have noticed that all paragraphs are selected, but usually when we have a selector for element name like this, all the elements in the document will be changed, but that's not really the best practice because in an actual document, like a news website, there's so many paragraphs everywhere. And if you change all of them, surely the style will be off and it'll be ugly. So what you want to do is be very selective about the things you're targeting to avoid any change in things that you don't care about. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. I will show you how you can target just this paragraph here on line 15 instead of all of them. So the very straightforward way is to add an ID attribute to the element. So we go to this P element, and on the open tag, add a space on the right-hand side, and then type ID equals double quotes, and type the ID, which is an identifier for this element. Now, the ID attribute is something that's unique to this element, and no other element can have this ID. So let's call it, let's say, the uh, unique paragraph about that. So when you write an ID, make sure there's no spaces. If you're writing multiple words, you can either put them together or have a dash or underscore, or use like some casing like Pascal case like this, or camel case like this, just to make sure there's no space, okay? If there's space in things, a computer usually thinks it's two separate things. So that's why we don't want to have space. Okay, this is the ID that I'm using to identify this element. So I can use that for my selector. And the way I use it is by typing hash first and then typing the name of the ID, which is unique dash paragraph. That way, only this, and only that paragraph will be changed in the document. If I scroll down, only that one change. You notice this other P here, which is, I think this one, didn't change. Okay, so that's a way to target only one element. But the downside is it have to add the ID. Okay, but what if you want to target maybe more than one thing, but not all things? Maybe I have another paragraph here. Let me put a P and tab. So it adds the open and close tag automatically. And I'm going to generate some random text with Lauren 4 tab. And we have two paragraphs here that I would like to style the same way, like this. How would I do that? Well, for that, we use what's called a class. So instead of having ID here, I would make these two paragraphs have an attribute called class with the same class name. So let's make it a class. So what I would do here is instead of ID, I'm going to add class. I don't think it's unique, so I'm just going to remove unique dash. And for the second paragraph, I also add a class attribute with the value the same, which is paragraph. Now the value could be whatever you want, paragraph 1, 2, 3, or whatever. Okay, I just named paragraph. Now, what you got to do in the selector is you have to start with a dot. Dot means class name, target by all the elements that have the following class name, paragraph. Okay, now don't confuse, this paragraph could be whatever, right? I can write whatever here. I just got to make sure it's dot whatever, okay? And you see both of them have color red and background color black. Let me revert. So that's the way we can target multiple and be very selective about as many or as few as we want. And if I tell class is usually the best practice for styling something, okay? So if you are unsure which one do I use, the best way is just add a class and be happy, okay? Class is the way to go pretty much for everything. Somebody asked when to use ID versus class. So even though I show you we can use an ID, I wouldn't do that usually. I would always use class, okay? So try not to use ID because it's something very unique. So if you really have something very unique, a style that's unique to something, and you absolutely cannot use class or any other selector, then you can use the ID. But I would just default to using classes everywhere. Even if you don't know about the selectors, as we're going to see later, we can make the selector actually more complicated than it is. You can always default, just use a class and be happy. I don't have to worry about creating complicated selectors. Yeah, so the ID is usable when you want to select something very specifically, especially with JavaScript, as we learn later on, and when we call get element by ID. But even doing that, in the past, people have targeted things using class name with a JS dash prefix to say it's only for JavaScript, but that's another matter. Okay, maybe, I don't know, the ID could be useful if you had a third-party package that for some reason added a unique ID there, which is kind of bad, if I must say, but then you could target that. Anyway, if you forget everything, just use class, okay? If you're unsure, use class. All right, so nice. Now let me show you one other thing. Let's say we don't have to have just one selector and like this. We can have multiple things. For example, let's say I want to highlight some words with the yellow background color like a marker. How would I do that? Well, one way is, okay, you can find what you want to highlight. Let's say sit Ahmet, this word here. Let me find where it is. After the audio player, I think it's this word here, line 20. So let's say I want to highlight this with the background yellow like a marker. All I would do is include that in an element, and then I would add a class to that. For example, I can use what's called a span element. That's usually used for inline text. It's just a generic container for the inline text. So I can put that in the span like this. Notice visually there's no change, right? We are just doing that so we can, let me close that with Control B. And then we can add a class here. Let's say, let's call it highlight. So whoever element has the class highlight will get a background color yellow. Then we go to our CSS here and we would add another selector. It could be before this one or after this one, doesn't matter. So dot, because we're talking about classes, highlight, and then curly braces, and I like a space here usually, and then background color separated by a dash, yellow. And you can see now that it has background color yellow there. And then I could go on and reuse this class. What's great about class is I can use it anywhere I want after having only defined it once. So let's say I want to make this second item from the list there highlighted. So I would go to the order list here in line 25, second item. I could either add a span to this, or since I want to target the whole thing, I can just add to the li here, a class, highlight. And now you can see the whole thing is highlighted. Although now that I think about it, looking at it, if I don't want this whole line to be highlighted, I would actually have to have the span. So let's move that to a span. So enclose that in a span. And then you add the class there. Now only the text that's inline is highlighted instead of the whole row for the li, which is list item. And to make it a little easier for you to read, I always like to break a line like this if you have something more complex inside. So it's easier to read. It can go even further. Some people like doing like this. So it's up to you to choose the style that's most readable to you. Okay. So just keep going like that, and you can build a lot of things just by writing in this convention. Now let me tell you how you can write this in a separate file, because this can become really long and it's going to get out of hand. The document, the file is just too long. So what we do is we can create a file here. So we could create a general, what we call style sheet that any other file could follow, or we could create one that's very specific to this page, okay? So if you want the style to be very specific only to this page, you could create a file here, and I'd probably name it after the page, like index.css, which is just meant for the index. And then I would take the code here. Let me split down so you can see both at the same time. So I paste it like that. Okay, now if I remove this here, you're not gonna see it anymore, right? Now, how do I make sure I kind of link this file to this index.html? Well, we're going to use what's called a link tag. So we're going to say link with the angle brackets. Now I have to tell, okay, rel attribute style sheet like this. And then you got to tell it, where is it? Okay. So if you type link, if you forget everything, like you can type link and let me show you. Oh, it is not doing it. That's strange. Hold on. If I type link and tab, it should autocomplete for you like that. Okay, it's a feature from VS Code called a met. But anyway, the attribute href and then close it. So that's a self-closing tag in a sense. You don't have to close it like this. You don't have to, okay? Self-closing. So in the href value here, you type the CSS file path. In this case, because it's in the same directory as the index.html, we can use a relative path and just say index.css. And now you can see on the right-hand side that the style is now applied. Okay. Now, like I told you before, I think this highlights class is actually something that could be global to every single page, right? It's not specifically this page. Maybe I want to have this highlight class available for me from every page that I make. So whenever I need to highlight something yellow, I could just apply the class highlight. So what you could do is create a new file here called global.css because you want this to be, if you need some global style, just include this file. And you can move that there. So you have index, that's just specifically style specific to index, and global, which is for any page that you want. And then to use that, you would just go here, either before or after. Let's do before, because I think it's better to do it before because the global can be overridden by the specific one. So global goes first. So you would add a link tag, rel style sheet, and then the href would be a global.css. So if you have something that applies to any page, I would put in global, and then you can reuse the class like this. That way you don't have to rewrite it every time. Because I've seen people in a previous bootcamp, when I asked them as an exercise, I want you to do the same styling in another page. So what they would do is they would pretty much copy the same class definition like this. So you can see there's the two places with the same thing. So if you see yourself doing that, you might want to extract that into some generic or global CSS so you don't have to write it again. All you have to do is include with the link to the global, and you can use highlight. For example, let me go to the other page, sign up. This is the other page that we have. You click sign up. Let's say I want to highlight sign up here. You see there, let me put this down a little bit so you can see better. That word is right after home. It's this one, sign up. So I can add that span there, enclosing the words, and add the class highlight if I want to make it background yellow. But right now it doesn't work, right? Because this file in the signup.html doesn't have any link to the global one. So what I would do is go to the end of the head before that and add the link. Remember, link tab if you don't remember, and then type global.css. That way I can also enjoy the highlight here. So it's basically, it's very nice to reuse styles. So you don't have to write the same thing twice or even thrice and so on. All right. Any questions? Let me know about the topic. If you have some question not necessarily related to the topic, you ask in Discord. Let me try to send you the link. So I want to keep it focused, but I'll gladly help you on Discord. Let me show you, give you the link here. Meeting group. That's the link to Discord again. Okay, let's talk about colors a little bit because that's very important to CSS. You might come across that. Um, and why we'll do colors, I'll teach you a very powerful debugging tool. That's the DevTools. But anyway, let's show you here. Let's see how I can go about this. Maybe I'll go through the DevTools first. Let me go to Chrome. So I'm going to the browser right now because it's easier to show you as an external browser. And I have the page here open. If you don't remember, just right click, open with a browser and refresh. So this is the page we were working on, and this is the sign up. Let me increase the zoom so it's easier on your eye. So basically, uh, if I want to debug CSS, I would use the developer tools. There are two ways to open. For example, if you right click, inspect an element, it will bring it up like this. I'm using Chrome right now. On Firefox, the tab is going to say inspector. It's just a different name, but it's the same functionality. And then the other way is F12. On the keyboard, the key is F12. If you're on a laptop, you might have to hold Fn when you press F12. Anyway, you're going to go to the Elements or Inspector tab in Firefox. And you can also use this pointer here and point to anything on the content, and it will select it for you. For example, the first paragraph here, point, and it will select here. You can obviously do it manually. If I click here, there, it will highlight it as well. If you notice on the right-hand side here, it will change depending on the element. And that's actually the CSS or style tab. And if your layout's not like this, because probably the three dots here, you have a different one, like on the side, click three dots, or even separate, or like this. I'll keep it at the bottom, okay? All right. So let me highlight the paragraph here. You can analyze from the code itself, the HTML live document, it has a class paragraph, and you can even change it if you want. And then on the right-hand side, I can also see, okay, this element has a class dot paragraph applied. This is what we wrote, remember? And these are the styles. And there's a checkbox here that's very nice that you can uncheck to see what it looks like without that property. Obviously, the color became black, so we cannot see it. Let us remove the background color. What does it look like before and then after? Before and then remove the color, and it's like what it looks like without all of that. So in real time, you can debug and see the things changing. So it's very powerful. Let me bring it back. Now let me show you a different way to add or remove class. Obviously, you can go here and delete it, but there's a different way that can preserve. So click the element, click this .cls, and you can see these are all the classes this element has. So you can uncheck that to remove the class and to apply. So it's very nice. And if you need to add more, like highlight, I can type highlight here, enter, and it will actually add the highlight, but that's actually conflicting with the paragraph. So that's why I don't see it yellow. So I would have to probably remove the paragraph to see the actual yellow there. You can see it scratched out. All right. And the reason for that is the precedence. I think if we move this down, like I told you, I think that would probably change. Let's see. Yeah, it does change. That's why I suggested you put the global first so that it can be overridden by index, the specific style. Anyway, let's go back to the P. So let's talk about colors. You can see there's this either color circle on Firefox or the square on Chrome. And if you click that, it brings you this very nice color picker. Let me increase the thing so you can see better. Click that. It's very nice. It allows you to pick any color you want and try it out in real time. So you can maybe change it to like that. Oh, it looks nice with the yellow. And it gives you the code for the color. So there are different ways to describe a color. There's the hex value, which is hexadecimal. And there's other ones like RGB, which is red, green, and blue. Looks like this. And even other ones very obscure that we typically, at least me as a developer, I don't use. I usually use hex or RGB. Anyway, the hex one is very simple. It's basically the hash is saying this is a hex value or hexadecimal. If you look into map, into mathematics, there's base 10, which we usually use, that has the digits 0 through 9. And then there's hexadecimal, which has 16 digits. So after typing 9, it would go to A, B, C, D, E, and F. So it's like 16 digits. And yeah, so if you want to know more about that, look up how to convert base 10 to base 16, and you'll learn more about the math involved. But basically, we have 6 digits here, and the first 2 is for the red value. The middle 2 is for the green, and the last 2 digits is for the blue. So RGB, red, green, and blue. Have you ever heard of that? So that's what it's using here. So you can create colors by specifying what value for red, what value for green, and what value for blue. Now, the FF is like the maximum value. It's like 255 in base 10. Okay, so if I change this format to RGB here, you can see it changes to 255, which is FF in base 16. And then this one is easier for you because it's RGB, red, green, and blue. And the values for each go from 0 to 255. So if I want a full red, it's 255. Full green is 255. And full blue is 255. And in this case, when you have red, green, and blue maxed out, that's the white color. If you put them all 0, 0, 0, that's black. And if you want just red, you could put 255 for red and 0 for the others, and that's maximum red. And if you want green, you can put 0 for red, 255 for green, and 0 for blue, and that's green. And likewise, you can put 0, 0, 255 for blue. And if you can play around, you can change different colors, and it will automatically change the codes there for you. So you can pick that or the hex. The hex is more convenient to copy, I think. So yeah, as I change it, the values change there. And I guess I like oh, this is nice one. All right. One thing I didn't talk about is if I go back to RGB, there's an A here. What is the A? The A means alpha, which is the transparency. So if it's 1, it's like opaque. And if it's 0, it's totally transparent, so you can't see. If you put 0.5, that's like 50%. It's like 50% transparent. And it can keep going like that. So from 0 to 1, opaque, transparent, something in between, you can adjust. If you want it very, very, very almost transparent, 0.2, 0.1, so you can adjust there. I'm going to go back to 1, which is opaque. Okay. Now, another thing that's nice about this, if you click there, it tells you about this contrast ratio, which is basically, okay, how does this color for the text look when we read it with the background that we have right now that is black? What's the contrast ratio? If I click to expand that, it tells me it's 16.6 to 1, which is really good. So it passes the standards called AA and AAA. These are accessibility standards, which mean the highest the contrast ratio, the better it is for us to read and discern between the foreground and the background. So if you had a really bad one, like the color is almost black for the text, you can see the contrast ratio is really low. It's 139. So it's really hard for us to distinguish the text and the background if you look there. And you can see it doesn't pass AA because you need at least 4.5. And it does not pass AAA because we need at least 7. So how can we fix that? Well, we want to increase the contrast by selecting a better color. So if you make it more and more white, you can see the contrast increases. Okay, passes AA, passes AAA. So I think like this, it's very good to discern between the colors for the text and the background. So very nice feature that you have in a browser there. Okay, I think I like this color. So what I do is after selecting the color and choosing either hex or RGB, I can copy this here, Control C or Command C in Mac, and go back to my code and replace it there. Let's see if I can find. So here's my code here. I'm going to go to index.css here. I change this to red. If I go back home. from red to that, and I paste it here. Now, the reason I have to copy and paste this here is because when I change the developer tools, that's not permanent. So whenever I refresh, I'll show you. I didn't save this, by the way. That's why I want to show you there. If I go back here, let's say I changed it, but I didn't actually copy that back to my original code, and I refresh, now it's gone. The color is back to red. So be careful as you're doing things in the developer tools. You want to make sure to copy the code back to the original, otherwise you lose it. The changes are never permanent. So whatever you change here, it's only for you. It's not for other people. Somebody might ask, hey, can't we make it permanent somehow through the DevTools? I think there's a feature if you go through it, maybe sources, I don't know where, but if you go look up the tutorial, how to make the changes in the DevTools permanent, that's likely a tool that you can use within all these functions here. But for the most part, you want to be careful doing that. So always copy it back to your original code. Uh, And yeah, talking more about colors, your Visual Studio Code also has the function of the color here. So you can also get that feedback if you click here and can also pick different colors. So I think it's the same function as the dev tools. But very nice. Okay, so what else we do? Okay, let's talk about how to find out about other CSS properties, because that's you had to learn by yourself most of the stuff. I cannot possibly show you every single property there is. So how do I figure out what CSS property I should use to do something? For example, maybe I want to change the size of the font. How would I go about that? Well, there are different ways. Going back to the browser here. The most straightforward and traditional way is doing a web search. Your favorite search engine. Okay. How to change font size CSS. And then you go through the results. But the most popular one is probably W3 Schools or MDN. So you click there and you read about it. Okay, the font size property sets the size of the text. So that's the one you're going to use. And if you scroll down, they give you examples how to use it. And you can click this button, try for yourself. And here is the code on the left-hand side and the actual document on the right-hand side. So you can play around, change this value. Maybe I want to change 100 for H1, and all the H1s will have that 100 font size pixel. And click run, you see it's really big now. So the unit for the sizing here is px, which stands for pixels. Okay, so it's a very common unit we use. So it's font size. Another way to find out about the properties, you can ask a AI or artificial intelligence chatbot like ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, whatever it is that you use, Google's Gemini, and so on. Just ask the same question I did in the search engine, and they'll tell you. Okay, yet another way is the DevTools itself. You can always go there. Like I'm going back to the page here and refresh so I can get that style. You can always go there, play around. Okay, let's say I want to target this H1 here. Let's see what it looks like. Let's find out what properties I could change. I would click, you see this element.style? I click there and I can start typing stuff. Let's try F. Oh, there's so many properties that it suggests with F. Oh, okay, I've noticed there's font, family, size, style. Oh, size, that's what I want. So I'm going to choose that and tab. And it even gives us suggestions for the value. Okay, I could try all these values. A nice feature that I use when I want to try out all these values is I press the keyboard arrow down and it will browse through every one of them and you see changing in real time like that. But out of these values, it doesn't really show the pixels, right? So you got to type it yourself. So if you want to start from a very small, you want px, and in the keyboard, we press up and then down to figure out, to calibrate what font size I want. Maybe I'm going to increase until I find the perfect one for my use case. Okay, let's do 32, maybe too big. Let's go down in the keyboard, maybe 24. Okay, I like this. So you would copy this and find a way to target the H1, maybe add a class or ID, or maybe target by all the element names. But like I said, element name is not good practice. You could have another element the same name. It would change that as well. So you don't want to do that. ID is maybe not so good, but let's say you want to make this generic property. So in the end, it's all going to boil down. Just add a class. So you could add a class for that one. Let me demonstrate. Let's go here. I would go back to the code and we target the H1, right? In index.html, the H1 here. So add a class, let's say a site heading. And then I would go to if I think this class is specific to only this page, I'm going to go to index.css and add it there. By the way, you can always separate them with an extra new line there. That's better to read. Site heading. Remember, dot means target an element by class. And then here, I can go and paste that. That way, the site heading here, we'll have that 24. And if I change it, let's see if it's working. 100. Yeah, it's working, right? All right. Nice. Now, before I conclude this lecture, I want to show you a very nice trick to understand the selectors in Visual Studio Code. Is if you hover over this selector, it will actually tell you what it means. If you read that, it says an element class site heading. So that tells you, okay, this selector, what it means is you have any element in the document that has the class site heading. Oh, that makes sense. What about the other one? It's going to be any element that has the class paragraph. It's very nice. If I had the ID, let me show you here. Hash something, and I hover over it, look what it does. Element whose ID is something. Nice. So it tells me exactly what the selector is doing. So if you have no idea what a CSS selector is doing, hover over it with the mouse pointer in Visual Studio Code, and it will tell you what it means. All right. Right now, we don't have many complex selectors, but later on, we'll learn and we can find out. And let me remove the hash. What happens if I remove the hash? Well, that's not really valid HTML, but it's an element that's called something. That's not valid. Let's put P there. And you can see, oh, all the P elements. It's a very powerful tool. All right, so time for us to take a break. And I'll see you in 10 minutes.